Our next speaker is a truly force of nature with many talents and facets to her. A French and an English teacher, a researcher, a guest speaker, a singer, composer, producer of musicals, a writer, an anti-racist activist. Estelle's specialty is on international and schools and culturally responsible professional development. She has recently been appointed to the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Board of United World Colleges, the leading institution worldwide for this type of work. Born in Cameroon, the daughter of diplomats, Estelle has lived and worked in many countries, Congo, India, Kenya, Malta, Spain, France, the Netherlands, Switzerland. Estelle and her passion for Africa go hand in hand. Everything she does is geared towards showing the world the cultural richness of the African continent in all its forms: literature, music, arts, history, traditions. Her blog is dedicated to African literature and authors while fostering an open dialogue around the topics discussed. As the leading singer of the African band Pososhok, Estelle promotes unity and solidarity while respecting diversity and personal identity. Her sold-out musicals performed by high school students highlight the importance of showing different cultures in a respectful manner. Estelle is a firm critique of the lack of racial and cultural diversity amongst the staff at international schools. Her tireless critique of the institutionalized racism and the hypocrisy around it are her constant battles. At every school she's worked for, Estelle has managed always to provide and create safe spaces for students of color where they feel respected and understood. Today's conference is organized by ALI, the NGO created by Estelle, to promote quality universal education in Africa. Estelle dedicates all her efforts to train teachers from underfunded schools in various countries in Africa. As you can see, Africa and Estelle can't be without each other, really. Africa is Estelle and Estelle is Africa. She'll be talking to us next about African women. So let's celebrate that she's actually one of them, and we are very fortunate to have her.
Thank you, Maite. Wow. Now I have to live up to all that. I truly appreciate that. It just warms my heart. And I want to welcome everybody to this session on African women in history, and also say welcome to Ariane, who will be leading the organizational side of this session. So thank you very much for attending this with me. Yeah, I've been introduced by Maite, so I won't. I don't have any more anything else to add. Just wanted to remind you that I would be talking about teaching African history in the 21st century. Of course, that's the title of the conference, and my part is on African women and history. So this is basically the questions that you asked when you register, some of the areas that you wanted to discuss. Les femmes africaines, la colonisation, l'antiracisme, I'll try to touch on that. The role of African women in traditional education, a tiny bit, and women in government also. So this is what we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about African history and intersectionality. We are going to discuss hidden and silenced figures. We will look at tokenized and neutered figures in African history, women in African history, explore the angry Black woman trope, and think about African women making history today. So you see the aim here is when we are talking about history and African history in particular, we are not going to try to regurgitate a series of dates and say everything that needs to be said that should be said about our topic. It's not about stamp collecting a series of historical figures or covering a culture of exotic history in an otherwise maybe Eurocentric syllabus or historical conversation. What we want to do is to search for our common roots, because we know that as a humanity, we all originated in Africa. So learning about Africa is actually learning about ourselves. We are going to look at African excellence, resilience, and overcoming. So there'll be no, we'll try to avoid the victimization and deficit narratives in this session. And learning about African history and women in African history, last but not least, is preparing for a better future. So talking about African women in history obviously comes with a feminist stance. We have to remember that Africa is not patriarchal all over. As far as the continent is concerned, we have a lot of matrilinearity that does remind us of the fact that women are important on the continent. Here are the zones, the dark zones are zones where you can find matrilineal ways of functioning, matrilineal societies. We're also going to talk about this topic from a decolonial point of view. Women in liberation movements and women in politics is going to be one of our topics. Important because often this history is written and about big men, but African history is one where women have been very active and pivotal. So I'm going to share a couple of hidden figures from my own research. And also, I just want to say that the idea is really also to wonder why we have hidden figures at all. The first reason, obviously, being we live in a male-dominated world and women are not properly written into history, first of all. Female leaders remembered through orality can sometimes not be become hidden figures exactly for that reason. So we have, for example, Sarawinia Mangu, who was the queen of Lugu, the capital of Anza, the kingdom of now, that's now Niger. And she lived at the end of the 19th century. So she is recognized within the oral tradition, the Hausa oral tradition, for resisting both attempts of intrusion into her kingdom by the Pearls and the Sokoto Empire, known now as Nigeria. So she is, for me, a hidden figure because her history comes mainly through orality, even if it has been written by Abdoulaye Mamani, eponymous novel published in the 1980s. Female historical figures in Africa can also be invisibilized by the shadow of male giants like Bibi Titi Mohammed from Tanzania, who used to work with Julius Nyerere, but then was crushed and jailed because she was becoming a little bit too vocal, namely about women's rights. And then she ended her life in silence in South Africa, where she was brought back to her country's celebration of freedom towards the end of her life. But she had gathered over 6,000 women around the movement, Julius Nyerere's movement, TANU, and then wound up in jail. Strong women who go against the grain, like Aisha al-Manubia or Leila Manubia in Tunis, for example. She was a Tunisian Sufi leader, and she obtained the highest title of recognition, Aisha. I think it was called the Pole of Poles. So that's the highest title in Sufi hierarchy, which led her to lead men and to also be in charge of them and study alongside them. So for her, it led to her being controversial so a couple of centuries later, and not necessarily studied as much as she could have been. So hidden figures can also be hidden because women are naturally gregarious, working together. I'm thinking, for example, about Fatim Lamar's companions, who in the 19th century decided to basically kill themselves, burn themselves to escape the possibility of the 18th century, sorry, of being deported into slavery. I'm thinking about the graceful resistance by women in Cameroon a little bit before independence. I'm also thinking of the more recent sex strike by Kenyan women in 2009, demanding reform by the government. So women can work together, not really pushing one single leader forward, but in solidarity. This is what's interesting in African history when women are involved. Women can also be tokenized and nurtured as historical figures. You can see here some pictures of Rosa Parks, of Wangari Maathai, of Miriam Makeba or Nefertiti. You've all heard about these ladies, but we have to remember that Nefertiti was more than a pretty bust. When we talk about her, it's often about her beauty and the fact that the number of children she had, etc. But she was also quite a keen politician who was able to help her husband take key decisions. We often see Rosa Parks as this tired Black woman who just fed up one day and decided to stay seated. That's often how I see her presented in children's books. And Rosa Parks, for me, has to be remembered as one of the spears of the civil rights movement, someone who triggered a countrywide civil disobedience movement and made the civil rights movement really become much more powerful. Wangari Maathai, yes, she did earn Nobel Prize for planting trees, but she was also opposing the government and she went to jail for it. Very strong woman. I want to think about Miriam Makeba, of course, whose picture you see here. And we remember her on stage singing Pata Pata and other things, but she was exiled for her political ideas and never ceased to political activity, even marrying Stokely, the leader of the Black Panthers. So Miriam Makeba was a singer, but also a fierce anti-apartheid figure. So I want to talk here about the angry woman trope and how sometimes something that happens not only in African context, something that I think is true worldwide. When a woman is strong, she's more easily demonized or in risk of being crushed by the males around her, by the male leaders around her. As an example of that, I'm thinking of Winnie Mandela, of course, who is called the mother of the nation in South Africa, but who was also the victim of a campaign demonizing her, basically. I'm not saying here that Winnie Mandela was 100%, her hands were 100% clean in this struggle of apartheid. What I'm saying is that she was working with men who were whose hands were clearly full of blood too. But these were not necessarily criticized with the same vehemence as Winnie Mandela was. And it's really interesting to check the documentary by Arte on this figure, feminist figure, to see how the campaign was orchestrated against her reputation and how it worked. I also want to mention the last queen of Madagascar, Ravensova III, who started a fierce anti-European campaign. And in this context of colonization, the resistance in Madagascar was very, very strong, and the people people of Madagascar were really behind her, resisting, until she decided that the cost was too heavy. She was then crushed by the General Gallieni and exiled, humiliated in her palaces, not given enough money to survive. She was seen with old dresses towards the end of her life, the idea being that her past glory had to be crushed because she resisted. She had to be taught a lesson and be kept in her place. So African women making history today, the African continent is definitely not the least feminist one, I want to say. I want to mention also Sahle-Work Zewde. She's the president of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, and she's the head of state, obviously, of this country. The position is largely ceremonial, it's true, with some executive power. The third figure that I wanted to share with you here is the diplomat, Dr. Arikana Chihomborikyo Kieo, sorry. She's a medical doctor, this one, and she's also an activist. She's a public speaker, educator, and an entrepreneur. She moved to the US after living many years in Zimbabwe, and she became very famous recently for attacking the French exploitation in Francophone Africa, also known as La France-Afrique. Here you have my fellow Cameroonian Nathalie Yamb, who's Cameroonian and Swiss. She's well known to oppose also the actions of France in Africa. And she has been deported from Ivory Coast back into Geneva for causing trouble over there, talking against the president. To conclude this presentation, before we can carry on sharing together, I would like to present you my personal heroine. Because this is my mom. And she's definitely my personal heroine and someone who helps me understand how African women are important in African history. What can I say about my mom? She is in her 70s, but she is still doing a lot of charity work in Cameroon, leading her church. This is an important part also of African women in history and African history as well. We've seen this morning with the presenters that the spiritual dimension of Africa is strong. It's a country where you don't shy from saying that you believe in God. My mom raised 6 kids that she bore herself, but she continuously welcomed people in our home whom we considered our brothers and sisters. And when I say this, I think that a lot of African participants will recognize themselves in this pattern. The fact that an African woman doesn't only bring up her own children, she brings up the children around her who need her, who even want her, because my mom has been adopted by some of my cousins who are now nearly closer to her than myself. And this is just the way it is. And also my mom was born before independence. So she has been to school in the French system. And she has remained fiercely and strongly Cameroonian, has spoken to us in our language, Bafia, and has raised us with the value and the knowledge of our heritage. So colonization has never destroyed her African roots. So I think all of these features show why African women are strong and why they belong in history, why they are often activists in a communitarian way. Yes, just wanted to end this presentation with dedicating it to African women who raise many children, who uphold the African values and culture despite the pressure of colonization and all of the challenges that they can find in their way, remaining spiritual, remaining strong, and remaining community figures, making history. So this is Thank You in Bafia, Botoksen. This is all from me.